welcome to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. I'm Catherine Szeltner in our Washington, D.C. studio. It is good to have you here with us. Pro-lifers call on President Donald Trump to appoint a new director for the National Institutes of Health. Francis Collins is the current N.I.H. director. He was appointed by former President Barack Obama in 2009 after working on his campaign. Collins supports human cloning and embryonic stem cell research. The N.I.H. is the nation's medical research agency. We're joined now by Dr. David Prentice, the Vice President and Research Director for the Charlotte Lozier Institute, the pro-life research wing of the Susan B. Anthony List. Doctor, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Now, you released an op-ed on this very issue. Why do you think Dr. Francis Collins needs to be replaced?
Well, Dr. Collins is a charming fellow, but he's a holdover from the last administration. And let's face it, leftover personnel leave stale policy. President Trump has stellar pro-life credentials. Francis Collins is definitely not pro-life. He's in favor of embryo-destructive research, human cloning, and destroying those embryos, embryonic stem cell research, again, involving embryo destruction. The president needs his own man or woman as director of N.I.H.
We're a few months into this administration. What have you made of President Trump's pro-life appointments so far? I know there's been recent news on that.
Well, we're talking about HHS, so let's start with Dr. Tom Price, Secretary of HHS. You couldn't have a person with better stellar credentials than Dr. Price. Recently, Dr. Charmaine Yost and Teresa Manning. Dr. Yost in public affairs, Teresa Manning in population affairs. And these are women who have devoted their lives to comprehensive women's health care, to the protection of families, of children, and the dignity of human life. So we're very impressed with these appointments.
I recently had the chance to speak with Congressman Andy Harris. He is Catholic, he is a medical doctor, he used to work in the N.I.H. I asked him what kind of research he would like to see. Let's take a listen.
I'm a very firm advocate that we should go just like we aimed for the moon in the 1960s. What we ought to do is we ought to aim for an Alzheimer's cure, and we ought to aim for it as soon as possible. So I think we should enhance funding to think big about problems like Alzheimer's disease that are huge health issues, huge budget issues. And besides the monetary cost, diseases like that have a tremendous cost on society, on families.
So what do you think about that answer? Do you agree?
I agree with Dr. Harris. I mean, it is the National Institutes of Health, and we should focus on the patients first.
You know, we're talking about the N.I.H., throughout this discussion. Can you give us a perspective? What does the N.I.H. do? Why is it so important in advancing the culture of life?
Right, and the N.I.H. funds research and does research regarding life, regarding health. And it includes both basic laboratory research on just basic biological principles, cells and tissues and organs, but also clinical research to translate those discoveries into the clinic to help patients. And this is why it's so important. It sets the agenda in terms of what is important in life. Dr.
David Prentice of the Charlotte Lozier Institute, thank you again for being here.
Thank you.
There is a way for you at home to make an impact on the pro-life movement, to have your voice heard by our lawmakers. For this week's call to action, we are calling on President Trump to appoint a pro-life director to the National Institutes of Health. Here is how you can send your pro-life message. Go to sba-list.org/EWTN. The current N.I.H. director is an Obama appointment who supports human cloning and embryonic stem cell research. Cloning and the destruction of human embryos are not in line with church teaching. We need a pro-life N.I.H. director who will advance the culture of life through science and research. Tell President Trump to replace Dr. Francis Collins in the National Institutes of Health with a pro-life director. Go to sba-list.org/EWTN to make sure this pro-life message is heard loud and clear. Here on EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, we bring the pro-life activity on Capitol Hill to our viewers at home. To better find out what pro-life lawmakers are focused on now, we're joined by a member of the bipartisan Congressional Pro-Life Caucus, Representative Jeff Fortenberry of Nebraska. Congressman, thank you for your time.
You're welcome, Catherine. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
The pro-life caucus is bipartisan, Congressman, but the chair of the Democratic National Committee recently made a strong statement saying all Democrat candidates need to be for abortion. How do you go about dialoguing about abortion and life issues in this divided political climate with lawmakers who disagree with you?
Well, I think it's very sad that the Democrat Party now has an abortion litmus test, if you will. And I actually had a dialogue with a close friend of mine who is the member of the Democrat Party here, Congressman, and he lamented that. So I think it's up to members of the Democrat tradition who have accepted the premise that all life is worthy of being protected, that it is a fundamental principle of justice and a fundamental principle of compassion, that we create the type of society where we have an ecosystem where everyone is welcome, no one is thrown away, nor anything thrown away.
Earlier this year, you, along with Representative Diane Black, introduced the Conscience Protection Act into the House. Why is this a priority for you, and is conscience protection something pro-lifers need to be paying attention to?
Absolutely, the pro-life community needs to develop a depth of understanding of what this means. It's a little bit of a foreign vocabulary, if you will, to say conscience protection, but really this is the sacred space of the person, the place where a person makes a prudential judgment based upon what they may know to be right through reason, but they apply that reason with compassion, with heart, in application in a particular circumstance. We were able to introduce the idea into the political vocabulary of conscience protections because of the aggressive assault on the dignity of human rights, the dignity of freedom of conscience, the dignity, therefore, of religious liberty and other things that flow from conscience. During the health care debate, our last health care construct, the Affordable Care Act, sometimes called Obamacare, actually set up the mechanism by which the government was going to tell people how they must conduct themselves in pursuing their own health care needs. This resulted in a court case, several, Hobby Lobby being one, but the Little Sisters of the Poor as well, going before the United States Supreme Court to try to fight for their right to conscience and religious liberty. So it's very important that the pro-life community readily understand how this nuance of assault on the dignity of personhood is occurring, particularly in the health care debate.
Congressman, in case our viewers do not know, you are a practicing Catholic. Does your Catholic faith shape your approach to the life issue, and if so, how?
Well, I believe being pro-life is a matter, again, of justice, a matter of compassion. It's simply the right thing to do, and of course, my faith strengthens that principle, and I think helps form my conscience, particularly to the needs of the most vulnerable, as well as the poor. The fact that Catholic means universal, if you will. And so in the political realm, of course, we try to talk in universal language that might have an appeal to the mind and heart of someone who might not share our great tradition, but nonetheless has an open heart to these transcendent ideals, this gift of the intellect as it can strive for an understanding of justice, an understanding of life, an understanding of the beauty and dignity of truth, and embrace those concepts. So again, it's an affirmation of this universal desire that's in all persons' heart, being Catholic, to try to not only invite others to understand the depth of the gift that we've been given of reason, but to exercise it in compassion for those who are least among us.
Congressman, you also focus a lot on persecuted Christians in the Middle East. Would you say that work goes hand in hand with being a Catholic pro-lifer and defending the unborn? I'm interested to hear how you view the pro-life issue in a greater, more holistic lens.
Well, I think that's a great question because obviously we care deeply about the unborn child. We want women to be saved from the scourge of abortion. We want to set up a community that reacts with compassion no matter how hard the circumstances, so that persons know they are cared for and there will be a commitment to them both before a life is born and afterward, and this is essential. But this principle extends beyond just the debate that we have about being pro-life or pro-choice. It extends into what we call the holistic ecosystem. We're back to this idea that no person, no thing should be thrown away. And when you have a death cult like ISIS in the Middle East that has used a twisted form of religion to justify genocide against Christians and Yazidis and other religious minorities, it's not only an assault on human dignity and religious freedom, it's an assault on the principles of civilization itself. So again, the larger view of protecting life, creating the conditions in which communities can flourish, creating the conditions in which persons can exercise their conscience as it exists, as it's manifest in religious freedom, particularly persons who carry forward in time the ancient faith tradition which we possess. So I believe what we have at stake here is not only humanitarian issues, the principles of justice, but the principles of civilization itself, universals that we should, any person of goodwill, any person of reason should be able to embrace. And I think that's a broader view of what it means to be pro-life.
Representative Jeff Fortenberry of Nebraska, thank you for your time.
It's a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much.
Turning now to more life news, a board controlling a group of Catholic psychiatric hospitals in Belgium will now permit euthanasia. The chair of the board claims it's not a major policy change. The board wanted to make different options available to patients. There is Catholic outcry. The Brothers of Charity in Belgium, a group of religious brothers who operate 15 hospitals, say euthanasia is unacceptable, cannot be permitted, and cannot be justified in a Christian framework. Ohio Governor John Kasich delays 9 executions as the court continues to fight over the constitutionality of the state's lethal injection process. The effectiveness of a sedative is expected to be front and center of court arguments. Attorneys for death row inmates in Ohio claim one sedative doesn't render inmates fully unconscious, leading to an unconstitutionally high risk of harm. The Archdiocese of Kansas City and Kansas severs ties with the Girl Scouts, claiming the group no longer helps shape young women with gospel values. This is part of a greater trend. The Archbishop of St. Louis urged Catholics last year to cut ties with the organization over concerns contraception and abortion were being promoted to Girl Scouts. The Girl Scouts of the USA maintains on its website there is no partnership with Planned Parenthood, America's largest abortion provider, but pro-life watchdog groups like MyGirlScoutCouncil.com claim the Girl Scouts are members of International Planned Parenthood Federation and often celebrate female abortion advocates. The Kansas City Archdiocese is switching over now to the American Heritage Girl program. One of the biggest talking points from abortion advocates is that stripping Planned Parenthood of its $500 million federal dollars would especially hurt minority women. Here are some examples where we see that idea being promoted. Ebony magazine recently ran a piece titled "Trump Attacks on Planned Parenthood Endangers Black Women." And R&B singer Mary J. Blige did a fundraising interview last week for the abortion giant, praising Planned Parenthood for its presence in the Black community. Here is a telling statistic. Nearly 80% of Planned Parenthood's abortion centers are within walking distance to Black or Hispanic communities. To discuss what defunding the abortion giant would really mean for minority women, we are joined by this week's expert panel. Alfonso Aguilar is president of the Latino Partnership for Conservative Principles. Gloria Purvis is co-host of EWTN's own Morning Glory radio show and chairperson of Black Catholics United for Life. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Alfonso, you wrote an op-ed with a stunning statistic that ran in the Miami Herald. 64% of all Latino deaths in 2009 came from abortion. Can you expand on that?
Well, you know, I like to choose my words carefully, but what's happening in the African-American community, in the Hispanic community, is a real Holocaust. And if you look at the statistics, 52% of all abortions in America are performed on Latino and African-American women. And this is really concerning. Planned Parenthood is targeting our women. As you mentioned in the intro, 80% of their clinics are in our communities, and that's not by accident. And look, their roots, the roots of philosophical roots of Planned Parenthood goes back to Margaret Sanger and the eugenics movement. This idea that you do away with poverty by doing away with the poor. And so this is sad, and we're not talking enough about it in our community. And I think that's part of what we have to do, start raising awareness of what's going on in our community.
Gloria, you also have said that the proximity of these Planned Parenthood abortion centers to Black and Hispanic communities is not accidental. What do you mean by that?
It is not accidental when you look at Margaret Sanger's Negro Project, which she started in Harlem with the express intent of putting birth control in the hands of African American women so that they would stop having babies. And what she did in the Negro Project was she sought out the black minister to go out and put this message out in the community, because she knew if she went to speak, she would be met with lots of suspicion. And thankfully, people in the community were suspicious of this plan to space births. They saw it as a way to eradicate the community. And of course, the Catholic Church, with their constant teaching, was there to say this is wrong.
And it's interesting because they do recruit African-American activists or Latino activists to go after our women. But when you look at least in the Hispanic community, the majority, poll after poll shows that the majority of Hispanics are against abortion. They feel it's morally wrong. And if you look at the polls in Latin America, those numbers are even higher. 35% of the Latino population is foreign-born. They come from very socially conservative countries. And so they really oppose abortion. So why are these numbers so high in the community? It's because they have an aggressive effort, Planned Parenthood and other organizations, to target our community. And sadly, they target the poor, sometimes many women in despair. They propose abortion as an alternative, as something that is normal. It's just a medical procedure, and they don't mention the psychological impact it has on women. In many cases, these women end up having abortions knowing morally that it's wrong. And that has a terrible impact in their lives. So this is really disturbing. In the Hispanic community, I'm a little bit frustrated because I hear a lot of Hispanic organizations talking about immigration, which is a legitimate issue, talking about the dignity of immigrants. But what about the unborn? When it comes to the dignity of Hispanic children, of Hispanic unborn children, there's silence. And it's really concerning.
Well, same here within the black community. It's not like we're an abortion-loving community. In fact, you see groups like, initially Black Lives Matter was about addressing what they saw as police brutality, and that black life should be cherished. Yet somehow that message doesn't translate through to the black life in the womb. And so you see this great disconnect. Like, why does it have to stop once it's in the womb? And I will say, just from personal experience, going to a doctor, being told I had a high-risk pregnancy and being pressured into aborting, which I didn't do because the doctor didn't know not only was I married, I had insurance, I had a job, I also had Jesus, which take away any one of those things or none of those things, and a woman would feel tremendous pressure and fear to abort. But what we need to do is go out and point out, look, killing the poor does not solve poverty. It simply does not. It is not helping black women to kill an innocent member of the family. We have the opportunity in our communities through defunding Planned Parenthood to break the tie, number one, a habit of people going to those death centers in their community and sending them to real centers of whole care in their communities, these federally qualified health centers that actually deal with the real health issues that black women face. Diabetes, heart disease, HIV and AIDS, mental health issues. Planned Parenthood does not provide any of that. And they can also take care of any pap smears and things like that at these federally qualified health centers. And they can take the whole family there. And guess what? The whole family comes back. No one dies by going to these health centers.
That's correct.
Abortion is not health care.
Abortion is not health care. And I'm hoping that by defunding Planned Parenthood and by what Mr. Aguilar and I do, that we further break that tie in people's minds.
But we need more awareness. I mean, we see, for example, the Hispanic media. Every day they lead with a story on television about immigration, but there's no mention about the high rates of abortion in the Hispanic community. So we're looking at ways to make this a national issue. And perhaps the time has come for communities of color to come together, to lead the way and educate our policymakers. But because it's not only the community, sometimes our own policymakers don't know about the staggering rates of abortion in our communities, and make it, they want to make it, they want to talk about race. Well, let's talk about the rates of abortion in the Hispanic community, in the African American community.
And let's talk about these stunning statistics. Thank you both. Hope to have you both back here again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. When we come back, the man once called the abortion king wanted people to know how he deceived America. We introduce you to a woman on a mission to share his message. Stay tuned as EWTN Pro-Life Weekly continues after this break. Welcome back to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. I'm Catherine Szeltner. This week, we speak out about science being twisted to excuse debate on population control. Bill Nye, known as the science guy in popular culture, launched a new show on Netflix, Bill Nye Saves the World. In an episode called Earth's People Problem, Nye poses this question in a panel discussion. Should we have policies that penalize people for having extra kids in the developed world? Bill Nye, no. Even musing that question is dangerous and suggests that some lives have more worth than others. Extra kids connotates unnecessary kids. Where would society draw the line after 3 children, 2, 1? As the daughter of a woman who was the youngest of 10 children, I am very grateful my grandmother said yes to life and was not penalized for her yes. But Bill Nye's discussion gives the impression it might be better if my mother wasn't born, which would mean I wouldn't have been born, neither would my siblings or future generations to come. That's personally offensive to my family and to many others. And finally, Mr. Nye, if we are going to have an honest discussion about science and human life, let's talk about the science of the unborn baby. The fact that at fertilization day 1, all human chromosomes are present and a unique life is beginning. A unique life that should never be considered extra. There is always a proactive way to counter today's culture of death. You can follow this week's call to action. Go to sba-list.org/EWTN. Tell President Trump to nominate a pro-life director of the National Institutes of Health to promote life in research and science. At one point, Dr. Bernard Nathanson directed the world's largest abortion clinic. But before his death, he would become one of the most outspoken pro-life advocates. In this week's Pro-Life Focus, we introduce you to one woman committed to spreading Dr. Nathanson's message on how he deceived America into accepting abortion. Terry Beatley is a stay-at-home mother with a hunger for knowledge. The Virginia homeschooling parent took an interest in the abortion movement's history. The more she researched, the more Beatley felt called in prayer to meet with Dr. Bernard Nathanson. Nathanson presided over 60,000 abortions and co-founded NARAL, Pro-Choice America, before his conversion to the pro-life movement. To Beatley's surprise, the former abortionist agreed to an interview while dying of cancer.
At the end of the interview, I felt such compassion for him because he knew the culture of death he was leaving behind. And he knew he had been the preeminent physician who led the pro-abortion movement. And I said, Dr. Nathanson, if you have a message for America, I said, I know you're too sick to get it out. I said, but if you tell me what your message is, I promise I will commit the rest of my life to delivering your message across the country until it becomes common knowledge. He said, continue teaching the strategy, it's an 8-point propaganda strategy, of how I deceived America, and then tell America that the co-founder of NARAL, Pro-Choice America, says to love one another. Abortion is not love. Stop the killing. The world needs more love, and I'm all about love now.
The propaganda point Nathanson called the most brilliant political strategy was the Catholic strategy, targeted towards American Catholic voters.
So what they had to do was intentionally separate the Catholics' religious doctrine from their legislative judgment, and they called it the Catholic straddle. And that straddle was to allow those conservative Catholics who were personally against abortion, but they would sell it like this: you can remain Mr. and Mrs. Catholic voter in New York, personally abhorrent to abortion, but it's okay to vote for a pro-choice candidate because it's just a personal decision between a woman and her doctor.
The lies of abortion all came crumbling down for Nathanson when, for the first time, he saw a baby in an ultrasound.
She, that little girl, was smiling. She's sucking her thumb. She's yawning. She's wiggling her toes. And the father of America's abortion industry, who founded NARAL, Pro-Choice America, who skidded the road for Roe v. Wade with propaganda, recognized the humanity of the baby in the womb.
Nathanson died in 2011, but Beatley hopes his message lives on in her new book, What If We've Been Wrong? It's the same question Nathanson posed to NARAL in his resignation, which came exactly 2 years after the Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision.
He's asking the chairman of the NARAL Pro-Choice America Board of Directors, what if we've been wrong? Question mark. What an incalculable injustice will have happened. He was trying to convince the NARAL Board of Directors we have now an ethical issue on our hand. We can no longer deny the humanity of that unborn baby.
Dr. Nathanson converted to the Catholic faith before his death, and Terry Beatley came back to the church during her pro-life research. This story is in the works to become a movie. We'll bring you more on that project as it develops. That's it for this edition of EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. You can reach us anytime at prolifeweekly@ewtn.com. I look forward to seeing you here again next week. Life is a gift. God bless.